This is a follow-up video to the one I've done on contemporary design argument. And here we're explaining a little bit more about both sides of the issue, what philosophers have to say in criticism of that design argument, and then what some responses have been proposed to those criticisms. Now, one criticism is after you lay out all the improbabilities for the universe being such that living organisms like us could exist, some people respond by saying no explanation is needed. I've heard this at a conference. And the idea is something like this. Of course, the universe is finely tuned to allow life like ours to develop. Now, there's really two different directions this can go. The first, I'm not exploring too far because I think, frankly, it's rather silly. The idea, it had to be some way, this is just the way it happens to be. Okay. But furthermore, we could not have found it any other way. So there's no explanation needed. The fact is that we exist. So of course we found out that the universe is such that it is organized in a way that life like us can exist. So you really don't need to explain anything. Now I'm going to borrow from Richard Swinburne an illustration that he uses in response to this. It's somewhat similar to surviving a death machine. This is his idea, not mine. So the idea is that when you have a mad scientist, we philosophers love mad scientists, and he's hooked you into a machine that is going to blow up with you in it unless it draws 10 aces of hearts from 10 shuffled decks, and they have to be drawn in a row. So you're hooked into the machine, and the idea here is, Richard Swinburne says, how would you respond if you were in such a machine and you're waiting for it to explode because the first card's coming out and you already know you have very little chance of surviving, but it's an ace of hearts and you survive and you say, wow, so I have another second or two to live. And the second one comes out and it's an ace of hearts and you think, well, that was extremely improbable. What are the odds that I could, get a third one? Third one comes out, it's an ace of hearts, and you're already thinking at this point, something's odd that's going on. Now, if you survive and you get the 10 aces of hearts that are needed, well, obviously it needs an explanation. First of all, let's think through the odds just a little bit. Now, some of you already know how to calculate probabilities well, but let's do some calculations. Let's do some numbers. First of all, the total possibilities of cards being drawn from 10 equally shuffled decks, and to get those 10 specific cards, the probability is 2.74 times 10 to the minus 21st power. Now, let's talk it through and then let's consider how unlikely this is. So, of course, the probability of getting a heart at all, the fact that it's just a heart, not even an ace, is 0.25. So you only have a 1 in 4 chance of it even being in the right suit. Now, the probability of getting an ace with one draw is 0.077, so about an 8% chance that you get an ace. So that's not very high to begin with. Now, the probability of getting an ace of hearts with one draw is about 2%, 0.1019. And so it's not very likely that you get that first one. But the probability of you getting 4 in a row, now here we're rounding off, is about 1 in 10 million, right? So this is incredibly unlikely. And the probability of getting an ace of hearts 6 times in a row is 1 in 10 billion. About as likely as winning a Powerball jackpot more than 5 times in a row when buying only one ticket per contest. And think about it. If you won a Powerball jackpot 5 times in a row, buying only one ticket per contest, they're not going to pay you out after 3 or 4 of these. everyone will know, be confident, that is, that you are cheating. Now, the probability of getting an ace of hearts 10 times in a row is as likely as winning a Powerball jackpot more than 5,000 times in a row. In fact, it's way more than 5,000 times in a row with one ticket per lottery. So, which obviously, if you're winning every single Powerball jackpot that's ever put out there, buying one ticket at a time, clearly no one would believe, oh, it's just happened to be that way. Somebody had to get the winning ticket. It just happened to be me again for the 500th time in a row, right? And 5,000 times in a row, we're just talking insane. Everyone would be extremely confident that it's rigged. And so that's comparable to the fine-tuning of the universe. So if you were in that death machine and survived, and you knew these probabilities, how insanely unlikely it was, you would have to conclude one of two things, right? Either it was just set up, right, and there were all aces of hearts in the deck, so that it was guaranteed that was going to happen, or it was otherwise rigged, so that that would definitely happen. The mad scientist must have just wanted to psychologically torture you, clearly had no intent of blowing you up, right? There was intent to have you survive. You would definitely conclude that. And so, with that being comparable to the fine-tuning of the universe, the unlikelihood requires an explanation. Why? Because in both cases, there's only one option that's valued and has a particular and unique explanation. I'll talk about that more in just a moment. So we can conclude that the machine was rigged, the mad scientist intended the outcome. Similarly with the universe and the fine-tuning of the physical constants. Now let's go back to this idea that only one option is valued, has a particular and unique explanation when the odds are extremely low. Detectives use this, right? You find a person with the murder weapon, the victim's there, you have all this evidence adding up, and there's video of the attack occurring and all of this going on, DNA evidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you just conclude, obviously, we've got the right person. Archaeologists investigating, finding things that are look like they were used as tools or constructed in some way by humans. Well, you know, they could say, oh, this arrowhead might have been just formed by random forces of a river and rocks hitting against it. Well, you could say that, or given the fact that it's near a site known to be where there are Native Americans, had been Native Americans living, you'd conclude it was intentionally designed. Anthropologists do this. So anyway, the idea that we have situations where there are unique outcomes that are extremely improbable unless some specific thing was true. The person killed the victim. The arrowhead was made intentionally, etc. That's the kind of reasoning that is used all the time in a wide variety of contexts. The method is used in identifying cheaters in casinos. It's used in identifying cheaters in lotteries, internet gambling sites. There have been cases where someone who worked for an internet gambling site was giving information to someone else on how to beat it, and they were caught because of the insane improbability of somebody winning that much randomly. Now, there are formal philosophical methods to distinguish mere chance, we might say, from intentional design. Peter Van Inwagen, Daryl Ratch, myself have written on this, ways that you can do this, and they all would fit in supporting the argument as we've seen it. A second potential criticism of the contemporary design argument, and this one is not one I'll spend a lot of time on, is just to deny the scientific claims, to say that we've been wrong these last 40 or 50 years. But this would be an odd response. The various areas mentioned, the cosmologists, the physicists, they seem to provide continuing building of evidence of fine-tuning, not any hint that it's going away. Instead, as time has gone on, we see more and more evidence of fine-tuning, and it's widely accepted among scientists. So this is not really a good route unless you are someone who has extremely low confidence in any kind of science whatsoever. Now, a third criticism, and this is the one that's probably the most interesting, is that there are, in fact, many universes. And by many, we mean a very large amount of universes. So having them one like this, like ours, that's suitable for supporting life, is not that odd, right? If there were, in fact, trillions upon quadrillions, and even more universes, eventually one of them is going to be suitable for sustaining life. And if that were the case, then that would undermine the idea that it was designed. Suppose there were trillions upon trillions and quadrillions of these death machines. Obviously, there aren't enough humans to experience them, but suppose that were possible, and you eventually survive while everyone else that's ever been put in one did not. And the fact that there are many trillions and quadrillions of them, that would, you wouldn't need the explanation. If that were the case, you wouldn't have to think that the scientist was rigging it. Eventually, you get lucky, so to speak. And that's what happened to us. Now, how could this happen, right? How would we have many universes? Okay, one option that some people objecting to this argument have proposed is that actually we have an oscillating universe. So there was a big bang, a large expansion, and then there's a big crunch, and then there's another big bang, right? The crunch, the collapsing of the universe back into the pinpoint starting point, and then it happens again. And so that just continues to happen infinitely over and over. Eventually, one of them is stable and lasts long like ours. Most of them are blips, less than the time it took me to make that sound, but eventually you get one like ours. Now, the problem with this is just consider our own universe. There's not enough density, even taking into consideration dark matter and dark energy. There's still not enough energy for our current universe to collapse. Expansion of the universe is accelerating. And if it's accelerating, it's not going to go backwards, right? It's not going to collapse. And so there seems to be little to zero motivation for this idea that there's an oscillating universe, other than you don't like the idea of the contemporary design argument, so you want to avoid that, which is obviously very ad hoc. You're just desperate for anything at that point, it seems. Now, here's another option. What other way could we have so many universes? Maybe there's an infinitely large pluriverse, all kinds of universes, right? So the universe isn't one singular, but there are billions and trillions and quadrillions, et cetera, universes that exist. Now, this has been taken seriously as a response, and some people propose that this is, in fact, the case. Now, current physics, and I've had conversations with physicists fairly recently, say there's really no current evidence for this. There's no reason to say that this is the case. Now, some scientists and fiction writers are motivated to find a reason for thinking this is the case. I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about this, and he gets very philosophically motivated, and his arguments are not in the realm of physics when he's talking about this. It's fun to think about, but there's really no good current evidence for it. Another problem with this is it violates the principle of parsimony, the principle of simplicity, which is a valued principle in physics, philosophy, and all disciplines. Occam's razor says that we should only theorize the fewest entities required to explain something. We have one universe, and we can explain everything that we experience and investigate with our one universe. And so we don't have reason to think that there is a pluriverse here. Now, there are some other considerations. There is at least one theist, well, I should say there are some theists who think that if God existed, that God might create a pluriverse because God would create all the universes that are above a certain level of good. Now, that would fit into concerns about the problem of evil, and it can actually be helpful there. But again, that would come from a theological, philosophical perspective on motivating the idea that there's a pluriverse, not a scientific explanation or evidence for there being a pluriverse. So at this point, to say that there's a pluriverse is really just another ad hoc response. There's not evidence for it. It's a way of saying, well, if there were, we wouldn't have to accept the conclusion that the universe we exist in was intentionally designed. Okay, but that's merely an hypothesis that's ad hoc. It really doesn't take away from the strength of the contemporary design argument.